Without further ado, folks, I'd love to introduce Lieutenant General Shaw, John Shaw, Deputy Commander of U.S. Space Command. Lieutenant General Shaw, John Shaw, is the Deputy Commander, U.S. Space Command. U.S. Space Command is a unified combatant command responsible for conducting operations in, from, and to space to deter conflict, and if necessary, defeat aggression, deliver space combat power for the joint combined force, and defend U.S. vital interests and allies and partners. Lieutenant General Shaw entered the Air Force in 1990 as a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy with a degree in astronautical engineering and a minor in Russian language. He has served in a variety of air and space operations and staff positions, including operations tours in the 50th Space Wing, the National Reconnaissance Office, the 32nd Air Operations Group, and the Space Warfare Center. His operational commands have included the 4th Space Operations Squadron, the 50th Operations Group, and the 21st Space Wing. He also served at U.S. Strategic Command as Director of the Commander's Action Group and as Deputy Director for Operations, and in the Pentagon as an Air Force intern as Deputy Chief of Space Strategy and Integration, a speechwriter, and as a Senior Space Policy Advisor. Prior to his current position, Lieutenant General Shaw was dual-hatted as a Commander, Combined Forces Space Component Command, U.S. Space Command, and Deputy Commander, Space Operations Command, U.S. Space Force, Vandenberg Space Force Base, California. He also served as the Deputy Commander of the Air Force Space Command, United States Air Force. Please, everyone, welcome Lieutenant General John Shaw.
Okay, hey, well, thanks, Casey, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this event. And you know, when you first sent me the email with the invitation, I was really hoping I could be there in person. You know, I love coming down south from Colorado to New Mexico, and would have loved to have been there in person, especially with the terrific agenda that you have on this conference that started, I think, Monday afternoon, late, then all day today, all day tomorrow, and then some workshops and such.
Next year, sir.
I'm glad I could be here, at least virtually. It's kind of not satisfying the same way that, watching somebody on TV eat authentic Mexican, you sort of get a feel for it, you get into the spirit, but it leaves you massively unsatisfied. That's kind of how I'm feeling right now. I'd rather be there, but this is perhaps better than nothing. And you do have, I mean, a terrific agenda with a lot of terrific experts there. If I have it right, I think you all just heard from Pete Garrettson in the previous session, if that was the agenda was on like the same schedule that I saw, and he gave his usual year in review, which again, I was not featured. Pete, maybe next year. And then of course you heard from Dr. Goswami earlier today. I wish I'd been there for that. I'm sure I'm going to say some international things that are wrong that she would correct me on, and I'd be happy to do that. And then again, a lot of other terrific names you got coming in tomorrow to speak. So, hey, but we just have 30 minutes. And what I thought is I just want to fire out a few ideas, hopefully at least slightly provocative. And then we can do a little bit of Q&A and maybe really get into the meat of it, especially given the context of what you all have worked on so far or heard so far in the conference. I'll start by saying, for those of you that, some of you have heard me talk about this, some of you haven't, about how I like to view the current situation we find ourselves in the space arena as a human society. There's a lot of ways that people couch it, right? We're in a second space race with China to the moon, or in general into cislunar space in the Earth Moon system. Others say a golden age of commercial space. The way I like to frame it, someone may have heard, is I think we're in the third space age, and I think it has great context for what this conference is focusing on as well. Now, the first space age, I would say, was the Cold War. And predominantly the actors were just limited largely to the Soviet Union and the United States. It was largely, almost exclusively, at least at the very beginning, national security related in nature, right? Anything from the race to the moon, which was a form of national security endeavor, I would argue, as well as the advent of reconnaissance satellites to replace air-breathing platforms, and the advent of strategic missile warning and strategic communications. It was all about strategic capabilities, mostly nation state, with a little bit of exploration going on, scientific, nascent commercial. Second space age starts at the end of the Cold War, and kind of a reversal of a lot of things we saw in the first space age, right? What was our adversary is now our partner when it comes to civil space. We were sending astronauts to the Mir space station, and then the ISS was assembled, and we started cooperating with our former Cold War adversary there, and in bringing in other nations as well. Commercial space really started to take off in a linear fashion, right? Mostly geosynchronous satellites, providing SATCOM, applications of the global positioning system that had been developed during the first space age, but came into its own in the second space age. And from a national security space perspective, in most of my career, at least early on, focused on taking those, what had been strategic capabilities, and honing them down to the tactical level, right? SATCOM, imagery from space from national technical means, and GPS, and really kind of delivering the best precision we could to our warfighters in the terrestrial domains. But what was most interesting about that second space age, I think, looking at it, was the absence of a threat, and the absence of a threat of conflict in the space domain. And I would argue that was actually an aberration, right? Humans, when they operate in domains, there tends to be, at the very least, mischief, and at the other end of the spectrum, outright conflict, and in between, a lot of competition. And we didn't see that in the second space age. But somewhere about 10 years ago, I think, is when we made the transition to the third space age, and it affected all the sectors of space, from a NASA and civil exploration, civil human spaceflight exploration. It was a shift from the routinized sending of humans to just a low Earth orbit to the space station, to once again setting eyes on the moon, this time for a permanent presence there, as well as to do it with partners, allies and partners, which we are doing. From a commercial perspective, nonlinear changes, is right around the mid-2010s when we saw the first reusable boosters operating, when we saw the first, no kidding, funding and application for license for proliferated low Earth orbit constellations that were a leap forward in terms of communications from space into the terrestrial domains. We saw commercial contributing to human spaceflight, being contracted by NASA to bring astronauts to the International Space Station, and I believe we'll see more of that when it comes to the lunar expeditions. There'll be a commercial aspect that we did not see in the Apollo era. And then from a national security space perspective, of course, the threat is now real. We enjoyed an absence of threat in the second space age. We are now faced with that threat today. Predominantly China is our pacing threat, but also Russia. I would say that to those that are disappointed by that, and frankly, so am I a bit, right? We shouldn't be surprised, right? This is a normal course of events in all domains, is competition and the need for security in those domains to further activities, including economic activities. So let me kind of take that framework, if you at least kind of see where I'm coming from, and apply it to how do we see commercial space fitting into that. If you look at massive efforts in the space domain through the lens of those three space ages, the first space age, the iconic example has to be Apollo. And that was vastly a governmentally directed effort. Sure, we had contractors that were building capabilities for NASA, but NASA was overseeing all that hardware. It was overwhelmingly a governmentally directed effort. If you go to the second space age, maybe an example to look at might be what we called then assured access and launch, right? There was some commercial leveraging of that capability, but launch itself was expensive and there wasn't a lot of it. And so it sort of became this hybrid of mostly state-led, mostly government as an anchor for that industry, but commercial leveraging it to some extent. In the third space age, all bets are off, folks. There are so many different launch opportunities now of different sizes that are supplying launch capability into orbit for all different kinds of actors, commercial, scientific, and of course still national security. But the market share of national security and overall launches has hugely shifted downward. And so we're just in a new age. So you can look at those three ages just from those kind of how major efforts in the space domain have played out. So against that framework, let me offer two kind of macro thoughts, and then we can maybe have a conversation. The first is, one of the biggest realizations we should have in this third space age is that everyone is in it together and we're interdependent in ways we've never been before. And I don't think we're ever going to go back. So for instance, civil space and human spaceflight is dependent on commercial, as I already mentioned, and will be, is dependent on national security, not only for recovery of astronauts, as we did in the Apollo era, but for awareness of the cislunar environment and sharing of sensor data and sensors themselves, and perhaps communication architectures. There will be interdependence in that axis in particular. There's interdependence between national security and commercial, and there's interdependence from commercial back to national security. So let's talk about those two pieces. National security space needs commercial in ways it's never needed it before. It's because we've come to a point where the technologies and capabilities operating in the space domain are not government-led efforts like they were in the first space age. They're actually able to leverage commercial investment and commercial opportunities and leverage those to go faster, to get better and more diverse capabilities, and to impose greater dilemmas on a potential adversary. So we need commercial in that regard. We need to be able to move faster. We need the innovation that it brings to bear. And we're already doing that in many ways. One sector that I can just one that I can talk to is space domain awareness. When I think back to 15 years ago, there was hardly any commercial capability that really could be brought to bear to really help us with space domain awareness. Now there are myriad companies that are doing anything from terrestrial sensing to data processing to predictive analytics, and using multiple phenomenologies for that sensing, whether it's radar or optical or other. And we need that. We need that capability. It's making things easier for us. Another example would be imagery, right? 15, 20 years ago, it was hard to really foresee anything coming along anytime soon that was going to supplant national technical means when it came to imagery. Now, I think if you crunch the numbers, most of the imagery being taken on the planet, the vast majority is all commercial sensing, of which the US government is leveraging greatly and using national technical means in a minority way where it needs to. So we need national security space needs commercial, and it's going to, I don't think that's ever going to go away again, because commercial is caught up in the domain with the capabilities that can be used for both. But let me flip the coin around and also say, commercial needs national security space because everything is interdependent, and the threats that we face from a national security space perspective in the domain from China and Russia could easily and should be viewed as potential threats to commercial systems as well. And I don't have to look much further or talk much further than looking at the current Ukraine conflict and the intense desire by Russia to try to do something about, in particular, the Starlink constellation. And there's been public statements by Russia along these lines, and even from China, that Starlink could conceivably become a target. Commercial companies could conceivably become a target because they contribute to broader national security and allied efforts. So how do we team together? How does that cooperation work where commercial needs national security space and needs security? I think it starts by just better awareness of the environment, both on a day-to-day basis, as well as the threats that are developing there, so that commercial companies can understand those threats and take that into their business case. That needs the best example that I often talk about is the commercial integration cell at Vandenberg Space Force Base. For those that are unfamiliar with this construct, just hear me out for a couple minutes here. We have right now just under a dozen members, individual companies that have agreed in a cooperative fashion to be part of the commercial integration cell. There's no money exchanging hands here. They basically have representation at the Combined Space Operations Center at Vandenberg. And it's done under a cooperative research and development agreement. And the quid pro quo there is we, U.S. Space Command and the Combined Force Space Component Command, benefit from the awareness of those companies and what they're seeing on their systems. And satellite, particularly satellite communications systems today, are very, very advanced and really kind of can be the first line of defense in detecting purposeful electromagnetic interference, including geolocation and such. Together, with all of that awareness, we are much stronger than we would have been separately or before those capabilities even existed. Excuse me. But the commercial companies, I would hope that they could maybe even talk to this, if there's any in the audience, also benefit from that relationship and understanding the threat domain on a daily and real-time basis. If there's something going on, then they can be aware of it, especially if it's going to impact their ability to either support us or our allies or just their general business. I think that's a good model for moving forward, and that's a real-time kind of model of understanding what's going on in the space domain. It's through that same cooperation we can probably better share and understand different threats as we're seeing in the domain, and then bring possible effects to bear to counter those threats. So I think that's a big question, is how do we team together in the future? Most of your focus is probably how can commercial space help national security with the services and capabilities they bring to bear, but we should also look at the other piece. How can national security space help commercial, help close business cases, help increase investment in the domain, and increase confidence in operations in space rather than the reverse? Okay, that's what I think I wanted to throw out just out there for some discussion. Casey wanted me to talk for about 12 minutes, and I think I went 14, so that leaves 16 left for any Q&A and discussion, and really would love to hear what's on your minds, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person.
I wanted you to talk as long as you wanted to, sir. If anybody has questions, if you could please come up here, and the camera's that way, so that way the general can see you. We have a couple coming, and we may have some online, sir. There you go.
Thank you, General Shaw. My question, my name is George Pullen. I'm Chief Space Economist for Milkway Economy. I'd be curious as to your thoughts on the future of horizontal launch with Virgin Orbit's Chapter 11 filing and how that relates to tactical response. Over.
Thanks, George. And just so everybody's aware, I am viewing the entire room from your 4 o'clock perspective. George, you're about 4 pixels wide standing up there. Oh, well, now it's zooming a little bit, but yeah, so if you turn around your corner, turn around your right shoulder, that's where I'm viewing you all from. Hey, George, so let me, as for context to the answer to the question, you know, the wonderful thing about being Deputy Commander at U.S. Space Command is that we're a warfighting command, and therefore we can be very demanding customers, right? Unconstrained in many ways, not completely and absolutely, but mostly unconstrained by cost or even technical readiness level, right? We just we want capability, and we want to have more capability than our adversary, and a whole lot more capability than our adversary. My own instincts as an engineer tell me that horizontal launch is not going to go away. It's always going to be there, and there will be some kind of solution. Why would we not leverage the capability to have a launch platform operating within the atmosphere that can really give a payload a head start from an orbital velocity perspective, and 2, impose a cost on an adversary and they don't know where a payload might be coming from, right? Launch sites can be tracked. We could get to mobile launchers, those could be tracked. But if I've got an air launch platform, I can launch from almost anywhere, and that imposes a cost on an adversary in terms of surprise and initiative. So I'm all for getting that capability in a broader kit bag to be able to be responsive for whatever those needs would be. That's a whole different subject of what kinds of things would be responsive space and what we need. But my bottom line answer is U.S. Space Command would love to see that capability delivered because of the additional diversity and capabilities it brings, and that ability to pose cost on an adversary. By the way, we want to impose as many costs on an adversary as we can, right? They aggregate. This would be one piece that aggregates. Hope that's helpful, George.
It was, thank you. Thank you, General Shaw. Stan Schull here. You mentioned the importance of space domain awareness data and that national security relies on commercial for that. To date, the investments have been relatively modest there. Wearing your hat as a combatant command and also Space Force, the broadest possible hat, do you see an opportunity to do more investment in space domain awareness data, maybe along the lines of NASA did with commercial crew and cargo, where they're having to lean forward and sort of make some bets in a way to really get that going and be an anchor customer for SDA data? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I don't think I would argue with your characterization as modest, especially again, as a very demanding combat command. We want as much as we can possibly get. I do think if someone were to look at the numbers, I think we're doing, you know, especially with our JCO effort that we have here at US Space Command, we've incorporated more commercial space domain awareness capability than ever before. I don't think it's diminished. I think it continues to rise, and we think we're going to continue to need that. The one way to look at it is, so let me pivot for a second and talk about where I think we're going with space domain awareness. I think ultimately there will be diminishing returns on terrestrial sensors, terrestrially based sensors. They're important to us. They will be especially important to the Department of Commerce when it takes on full-time space traffic management, because that's mostly where the traffic is operating. But from a space command perspective, we're always going to be wanting to look out deeper and in a more exquisite fashion. And so it will be interesting to see when the first commercial opportunities of space-based space domain awareness come along. That will start to fill in a niche that we know needs to be filled in, and that commercial could contribute to. Stan, I don't think I answered all your questions. There's a third part in there that I don't think I fully addressed. I'll give you a chance to reattack.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. Thank you. I was wondering how willing the Department of Defense broadly is willing to lean into that. I know there's always a concern about picking winners or losers in a market, but it seems like sometimes this market may need a real anchor customer for some of these data use cases, and so may require you know, picking some area and really investing heavily in that. I was wondering what the appetite for that is.
Yeah, here's another way I would frame it. The Earth-Moon system is going to become more and more congested isn't the word I want, because it's kind of overused, but there'll be more and more players in the total Earth-Moon system in the years to come for lots of reasons. Some of it's going to be exploratory. I think the last number I saw is over the next 10 years, there'll be 100 different missions to the moon itself. Of course, most of those are uncrewed, but that's just for science exploration. Then there's going to be commercial applications that are going to reach out beyond geo. And then there will be, of course, national security interests throughout the Earth-Moon system as we see potential adversaries operating in there. How will commercial bring services to bear to help all of those actors with transparency in the broader Earth-Moon system, of which national security space is really just one of those customers? So I guess I'd throw that out to the group to think about it from all sectors' needs of space domain awareness and what services could be brought to bear at scale that help.
Thank you very much.
Hi, sir. We have a virtual question. The CIC is a great construct, but it has been pretty limited on the companies who can participate. How do we open up additional access for new space companies?
So I'm going to give a really short answer to that. Stand by. I think we're not ready to make it public yet, but we are going to expand the CIC in the near future and also afford opportunities to expand it even further, period.
Hi, sir. I have a longer question. This is Carol Walsh.
Hi, Carol. How are you? Sorry, I'm not there.
We miss you in Albuquerque. So I'm really asking a question today on behalf of a number of the new space companies that we have been working with. And a common stream of thought that I hear from these companies is, great, we just won the SpaceWorks, SBIRS phase 1, phase 2. We've got our energetic young company, innovative idea, and there are a ton of innovative ideas amongst this group that it's really fun to see these ideas mature. But then they get stuck because after they've done their SIBRs phase 1, and there's hundreds of companies that have competed here, they know the Space Force is going to need this capability in a couple years, but there's no defined requirement right now. And so then that makes it hard for them to get private investment. Used to be easier, but now it's pretty tough. And they look and they go, what can we do? We need to be able to move fast. We know the Space Force wants to move fast, but we can't do anything without funding, and there's no source of funding for us right now. Do you have any thoughts along those lines and any advice for these new space companies?
Yeah. Hey, so my first initial reaction is it's a little snarky, and I apologize, but that is, I have the same question. I mean, here again, and let me explain, right? I'm at a combatant command. We want as much capability as we can get. We hear about great innovative things that are going on. And we've written our own, capabilities documents with requirements that we send to Space Force and other organizations that, acquire and present capabilities to us. So in a sense, I have the same question you do from a professional perspective here at U.S. Space Command. How do I get that? How do I get that from Space Force or from Space RCO or from Space Development Agency? And so just realize that, I don't think that our perspective is the same. And so I asked the same questions. So now let me try to be a little more balanced, right? I think the answer is continual dialogue with those organizations that are getting at these capabilities. And that dialogue has to include the warfighter and our requirements, which are continually evolving. And we understand more and better every day what we think we need for the near to the long-term fight, with the services and organizations that get those capabilities for us and those that are capable of providing those capabilities on the industry side. If we're having constant dialogue, constant iteration on what's available and how does it meet, we talk about an emergent need we have, and a commercial company hears about that need and says, hey, I think I have a solution. And then the acquiring organization says, hey, I think I can marry that up, and here's how I can make that work. I think that sounds to me like the building blocks to that success. But beyond that, Carol, I'm as curious as you are as to how do we actually make that happen.
Well, thank you, sir. Casey, maybe that can be something we talk about at this workshop.
Are there any more questions? David Hardy.
Good afternoon, General Shaw, Dave Hardy. What's your sense fast the required military maneuver in space is going to develop? And what do you think are going to be the drivers?
Well, okay, Dave. So
nice easy one for the afternoon.
Well, you just opened up our latest big endeavor that we have here at Space Command, which is sustained space maneuver and enabling dynamic space operations. And I see I have 5 minutes to explain all of that. And you probably knew where I was going. But let me say that, let me just give sort of the movie trailer version. One of the emerging concepts we have here at the command, it's kind of along the lines of what I was telling Carol, when we have emerging concepts, we're realizing, hey, this is what it's going to take in order to fight a future war in space or deter a future war in space to have the right capabilities in place, is that we need to have, for those platforms that are operating in space, they're in-domain operations, right? Not necessarily Earth-facing platforms, but operating within space. That can be space domain awareness, like our geosynchronous space situation awareness program, or other capabilities that are going to be in-domain capabilities. That we need to free ourselves from the Keplerian constraints that we've operated under since really the beginning of the space age, and be able to sustain maneuver on a regular basis. Right now, we can't do that, right? We launch platforms with fixed fuel tanks, with fixed and long lifetimes that force us to use them very, very cautiously, conservatively. That's not how you fight a war. And that's how you prepare for war fighting. It's not how you posture and deter. It's not how you do it in the other domains. That's not what we need to be doing. So there is this new effort that some of you probably already heard about on this enabling next generation dynamic space operations, where we want to find out ways that we can, U.S. Space Command can sustain maneuver for certain platforms that we want to be almost constantly maneuvered. And there are different solution sets to that, right? We don't want to be in the solution business. We don't want to dictate, I now need a refueling architecture. That might be part of the solution. Another solution could be I just get I get new satellites every 2 weeks, so I don't really care about fuel. I just use them up. Excuse me. But the bottom line is we really need to rethink on the national security side how we can get to sustained maneuver in the space domain. And then we should be able to leverage some commercial solutions for that one way or another. Let me elaborate on what I mean leveraging commercial solutions. From our perspective in Space Command, we don't want refueling as an example of a solution to lengthen lifetimes of satellites or to save money. That might be part of a business case from a commercial perspective, right? Extend the lifetime of a satellite or to save money somehow on replacement. No, we want to do it so that we can sustain maneuver and maintain initiative in the domain. But we could leverage a broader commercial solution that's also providing services to commercial entities that are doing it to extend lifetime or to save money. So that would be a sweet spot that we'd like to be able to get to. Dave, so good to see you again. I hope that sort of touched on what you're getting after, but there's a lot more coming into this in terms of our requirements for sustained space maneuver.
Yeah, just follow up, sir. Do you have a sense, your own personal sense of what time frame we need to achieve that?
So so we do have some timelines for that. The very short answer is we want by 2030 all platforms that we would call dynamic space operations platforms, and think about those as things that are in domain and should be able to maneuver. And the only reason they can't maneuver is because we didn't give them enough fuel or we made their lifetimes way too long. We want to get to by 2030, any platform along those lines does have the ability to sustain maneuver, is not constrained by extended lifetime or a fixed fuel tank that can't be refueled or any other kind of problem that can't be solved that doesn't allow us to do sustained maneuver. For those, again, who kind of not maybe hearing my message completely, in no other domain do we operate very conservatively with our maneuverable platforms because they're built that way and because we don't have a strong demand signal to go the other way. One wouldn't ever get into a tank battle on land where the tank can't go any faster than 10 miles per hour, right? You're just going to get outmaneuvered by your adversary, or where you can only drive it 2 miles a day and you got to stop. That is not sustained maneuver. And I can give you examples in the maritime domain and the air domain, and they're the same way. Sustained maneuver is what wins combat, is what deters aggression. And we need that in the space domain too.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, one more question by Troy Morris with one of the new Space Igniter companies.
Well, thank you, sir. Yep, I am one of the companies that I think Carol was speaking about. So my question is tied to, through this wonderful process of entering industry, we sometimes get the fortunate opportunity to reach the end user, reach the guardians that serve under your and similar commands. And an issue we frequently run into is great engagement, great art of the possible education, and we're both stuck. Both ourselves and the other side of the table are not fully clear of which innovation office they should pull this up to. I learned from some colleagues in the hallway here, one of the terms to give to the guardians and captains we're talking to on the other side. So the question is, do you see a push, or should there be a push for educating some of the new members of this still younger force so that as they engage with innovative ideas like ourselves, we're both able to move forward and good ideas aren't dying in the trenches? Thank you, sir.
I guess, Troy, I go back to what I said before. How do we all communicate better? Is it forums like this? Is it the reverse industry days that we see? I think the government needs to hear from industry on how do we, how can we hear you better and get you better what we're looking at doing? Do we need to be more public with our requirements? Do we need to have more iterative discussions? What I'm saying isn't new, and it's also not decisive. It's just, I think we need to just keep communicating and make sure we're not resorting to old ways of doing business that are more bureaucratic in terms of how requirements flow, how RFPs flow, strictly through non-personal interaction. How do we do that better? I'm actually curious, again, from a warfighting command perspective, I have the same questions to our service providing organizations. maybe that's the biggest thing I can leave you with, is that you're not alone. You know, your industry is seeing it from this side. Hey, how do I get in? How do I do this? How do we do this better? How do we get our capabilities understood by those that might acquire them? And then at the command, we're on the other side looking at the providing organization, said, hey, how do I get those capabilities better? How do I get my requirements fed to them better in ways that can get me what I need, no matter who's going to give it? And so I think that maybe the pressure is on, there's probably a few in the room that are probably like, oh no, the pressure is on me from a service perspective. How do you answer those questions? The questions come from both sides.
Thank you, sir. Short of a TikTok, we're willing to try anything new. So thank you, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, let's not do TikTok just yet. Yeah.
That's funny. Sir, I think that's it on the questions. And I just want to thank you for accepting my invitation to speak. I wanted to let you know, I know your staff had asked who your audience would be, and I think we have a little over 200 in-person participants. And first glance, this is an estimate, I think about 80% come from our space industry. So you were able to really share a lot of your vision with the space industry today. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thanks, Casey. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for the time. And I hope you all do enjoy maybe some good authentic Mexican tonight.
We're actually serving barbecue.
Okay. All right. Well, then that'll have to be in our tomorrow night.
It comes with some jalapenos.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, sir.